The grand treasure is found at last. But it's not the kind of treasure you think. Instead, it's far from what you could even imagine. Let's begin, the final part of our journey. The pirates climbed the steep slope in silence, the eerie events of the day weighing on them like a heavy shroud. The discovery of the skeleton, the haunting voice singing through the trees, it had all left them shaken to their core. By the time they reached the top of the hill, they could go no further. Exhausted and uneasy, they decided to rest. The plateau sloped gently westward, offering a sweeping view of the island and beyond. To one side, the dense treetops stretched out endlessly, the cape of the woods visible in the distance where the waves crashed against the shore. Behind them, they could see the anchorage in Skeleton Island, and far beyond that, the endless open sea shimmered under the afternoon sun. Above them, the jagged cliffs and pine-dotted slopes of the Spyglass towered like silent sentinels. The silence was oppressive. Only the distant roar of the surf and the faint chirping of insects broke the stillness. The vast emptiness of the view made them feel small, as though the entire island had been abandoned by life. Long John Silver took out his compass and began studying it carefully. 3 tall trees, he muttered, pointing to landmarks in the distance. They line up just about right with Skeleton Island. That slope there must be what they call Spyglass Shoulder. It's child's play to find the treasure now. We're close. Real close. He paused, looking toward the others. Maybe we'll even stop for dinner before we dig it up. One of the pirates frowned and shook his head. I don't feel right, he muttered. Thinking about Flint. I don't know. It's like he's still watching us. Another shuddered. He was a devil of a man, blue in the face from drink and anger. Just thinking about him makes my blood run cold. That's what the rum did to him, another added. Blue as the sea he was. I reckon he drank himself straight into the grave. The group grew quieter and quieter as they talked, their voices dropping almost to whispers. Fear hung over them like a storm cloud. Then, without warning, a thin, trembling voice cut through the stillness. It was high and eerie, singing a tune they all knew too well. 15 men on the dead man's chest. Yo-ho-ho! And a bottle of rum! The effect was instant. Every man froze, their faces going pale. Some leapt to their feet, gripping at one another in terror. One pirate fell to his knees, trembling uncontrollably. It's Flint! One of them cried, his voice cracking with fear. The song stopped as suddenly as it had started, cutting off mid-note like someone had covered the singer's mouth. The air felt heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. For Jim, the voice had sounded almost sweet, drifting like a breeze through the trees. But for the pirates, it was something far worse. It was death itself calling out to them. Enough of this nonsense, Long John Silver barked, though his voice wavered. His face was pale, his lips trembling, but he forced himself to speak. This is no ghost. It's someone playing tricks on us. Flesh and blood, I tell you. Nothing more. His words brought a flicker of courage to the group, but before they could fully collect themselves, the voice came again. This time, it wasn't singing. It was calling out faintly, like a ghostly echo. Darby McGraw! Darby McGraw! Fetch aft the rum, Darby. The voice repeated the words, growing softer with each echo, until it finally faded into silence. That's it, one of the pirates gasped, his face twisted in terror. Those were his last words, his dying words. One of the younger pirates pulled out a small Bible and began praying, his words jumbled and desperate. But the others were too frightened to move or speak. They huddled close together as though clinging to one another would protect them. Long John Silver gritted his teeth, his face tense but determined. I've never run from Flint alive, and I won't run from him dead, he declared. There's a fortune waiting for us, not a quarter mile from here. Are we going to let an old ghost keep us from it? 700,000 pounds in gold, lads. 700,000. The others looked doubtful, but they stayed close to him, unwilling to separate. Think, mates, he continued, forcing a grin. That voice had an echo. No ghost has an echo, do they? It's just someone playing games. The reasoning seemed weak, but to the superstitious pirates, it was enough. Bit by bit, their fear began to fade, replaced by nervous determination. You're right, one of them muttered. That wasn't Flint's voice. Not exactly. It was more like Ben Gunn's. The name brought a sudden realization. Ben Gunn, that old man? Of course, it's him. No ghost, just that crazy old maroon. The pirates relaxed, laughing nervously at their own foolishness. The tension broke, and they started moving again, their thoughts turning back to the treasure. The forest thinned as they approached the final destination. The sun beat down on them, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. At last they came to a massive tree, the third of the tall trees. It was enormous, its red trunk as wide as a cottage, its branches stretching far and wide to cast a cool shadow beneath. This was it. The promise of gold erased their remaining fear. Their eyes burned with greed as they rushed forward, their tools clanking in their hands. The old sailor's face was tight with anticipation, his every movement precise and purposeful. But as they reached the tree, their excitement turned to confusion. Beneath the spreading branches, instead of untouched ground, they found a deep pit. Its sides had partially caved in, and grass grew along the edges. Broken tools and shattered wooden crates littered the bottom. One of the boards bore the name Walrus, Flint's ship. The treasure was gone. The pirates froze, staring in disbelief. For a moment, no one spoke. Then rage erupted. "You knew!" one of them shouted at Long John Silver, his voice shaking with fury. "You brought us here for nothing!" Long John Silver didn't flinch. "Keep digging," he said coldly. "Maybe you'll find a pig nut or two." The others weren't so calm. One by one, their anger boiled over. One pirate raised his weapon, ready to strike. Then from the trees came the sound of musket fire. 3 sharp cracks echoed through the clearing, and 2 pirates fell where they stood. The remaining 3 scattered, running as fast as they could. Jim barely had time to process what had happened. From the shadows, 3 figures emerged: the doctor, Gray, and Ben Gunn, muskets still smoking. Relief flooded him as they hurried over. The group quickly regrouped and began moving downhill towards safety. The treasure was gone, but their lives were still intact, for now. After uncovering Ben Gunn's secret about the treasure in his cave, the doctor knew he had to act decisively. The morning after the pirates' attack, he approached Silver with a bold plan. He handed over the treasure map, which was now useless since the treasure had already been moved. He also gave the pirates the remaining supplies from the stockade. Ben Gunn's cave was well stocked with salted goat meat and other provisions, so they had no shortage of resources themselves. The goal was clear: leave the stockade and move to the safety of the two-pointed hill. This would not only keep them away from the swampy, disease-ridden areas, but also allow them to guard the treasure from a distance. When the doctor explained his decision to Jim, his voice carried a tone of firmness. "Jim, it went against my heart to leave you out of this plan, but I had to think about those who stayed loyal to their duty. If you weren't one of them, whose fault is that?" That morning, the doctor hurried to the cave, leaving the squire to watch over Captain Smollett, who was still recovering. Taking Gray and Ben Gunn with him, they crossed the island, heading for the tall tree where the treasure had been buried. But the pirates had a head start, and it became clear they wouldn't reach the spot in time. The doctor sent Ben Gunn ahead, trusting his speed and knowledge of the island, while he and Gray prepared for an ambush. Ben Gunn used his cleverness to exploit the pirates' superstitions, and the plan worked brilliantly. By the time the pirates reached the treasure site, they were unnerved, and the doctor's party was ready to strike. After the pirates' defeat, Silver looked at the doctor with his usual sly grin. "Lucky for me, I had Hawkins here. Without him, you'd have let old John get hacked to bits without a second thought." The doctor, cheerful as ever, replied, "Not a thought." The group made their way to the beach where the boats, the gigs, were waiting. The doctor destroyed one of the gigs with a pickaxe, ensuring the remaining pirates couldn't use it, and they all boarded the other boat to head to North Inlet. The journey was long, around 8 or 9 miles, but the sea was calm, and they made steady progress. Even Silver, though exhausted and barely holding himself together, rode with the others. They passed familiar landmarks, including Ben Gunn's cave, where the squire stood guard with a musket. Spotting him from the boat, the crew waved and cheered, even Silver joining in with a hearty shout. As they rounded the coast, they saw a surprising sight. The Hispaniola was floating freely near the mouth of North Inlet. The last tide had lifted her, and had there been a strong current or wind, she might have been lost forever. But luck was on their side. Aside from a torn mainsail, the ship was intact. They anchored the Hispaniola in shallow water, making sure she wouldn't drift again, then returned to Rum Cove. Their destination was clear: Ben Gunn's treasure cave. A gentle slope led up from the beach to the cave's entrance. The squire greeted the group warmly, showing no sign of blame or anger toward Jim. But when he turned to Silver, his demeanor changed entirely. "John Silver," he said sternly, "you're a villain and a liar of the worst kind. I've been told not to prosecute you, so I won't. But the dead men you've left behind hang around your neck like millstones." Silver, ever the opportunist, saluted politely. "Thank you kindly, sir." "Don't you dare thank me," the squire snapped. "It's no kindness to you. Stand back." The group entered the cave, which was large and airy. A cool spring bubbled into a clear pool of water, its surface reflecting the ferns that draped overhead. The sandy floor was soft underfoot, and in the corner, barely visible in the flickering firelight, lay the treasure. Great heaps of coins and stacks of gold bars glimmered in the shadows. This was Flint's treasure, the prize that had cost so many lives. 17 men from the Hispaniola had already died for it, not to mention the countless others who had perished while it was being amassed. The hoard represented not just wealth, but years of bloodshed and betrayal. Captain Smollett, still weak but recovering, sat by the fire. He greeted Jim warmly but looked skeptical as Silver stepped forward. "What are you doing here, Silver?" he asked. "Back to my duty, sir," Silver replied, as smooth as ever. The captain simply nodded. "Ah." That night, the group shared a rare moment of joy. They dined on salted goat meat, delicacies from the ship, and a fine bottle of wine. Laughter filled the cave as they celebrated their survival. Even Silver joined in, staying just outside the firelight, but ready to assist whenever needed. The next day, the real work began. Moving the treasure was no small task. They had to haul the gold nearly a mile to the beach, then load it onto the boat for a 3-mile trip to the Hispaniola. The gold bars were heavy. 2 bars slung on a rope were a burden even for the strongest men. Jim, too small to carry much, stayed in the cave, packing coins into bags. The variety of coins amazed him: English guineas, Spanish doubloons, Portuguese modores, and even strange pieces with symbols that looked like spider webs. Sorting through the treasure was both exhausting and fascinating, and Jim found a strange joy in the task. For days, the work continued. Each night, more treasure was loaded onto the Hispaniola, but the hoard seemed endless. Meanwhile, the 3 surviving mutineers stayed hidden, their presence marked only by the occasional distant gunshot. Eventually, the group decided to leave them behind. Supplies, powder, food, tools, and even tobacco were left for them, ensuring they wouldn't starve. When the Hispaniola finally set sail, the mutineers appeared on a spit of sand, waving and shouting desperately. They begged to be taken aboard, but the risk of another mutiny was too great. As the ship moved away, one of them fired a shot that narrowly missed Silver and tore through the mainsail. It was their final act of defiance. The ship sailed on, leaving the mutineers behind. Treasure Island faded into the distance, and with it, the horrors and chaos of the journey. The return voyage was grueling. With so few men left, everyone had to work hard, even Captain Smollett, who gave orders from a mattress in the stern. They stopped at a Spanish-American port to hire more sailors and enjoyed a brief respite among friendly faces in warm sunshine. When they returned to the ship, they discovered that Silver was gone. Ben Gunn sheepishly admitted to helping him escape, claiming it was the safest option for everyone. Silver had taken a small sack of coins, enough to fund his next adventure, and disappeared into the night. Though annoyed, the crew was relieved to be rid of him. When the Hispaniola finally reached Bristol, only 5 men from the original crew remained. Each received a share of the treasure, and their lives changed in different ways. Captain Smollett retired from the sea, content to live a quieter life. Gray invested his money wisely, became part owner of a ship, and built a happy life with his family. Ben Gunn, on the other hand, spent his share of the gold in just 3 weeks and returned to begging soon after. As for Silver, he vanished completely, likely living out his days in some far-off land. The remaining treasure stayed buried on Treasure Island, untouched and undisturbed. For Jim, the memories lingered. In his darkest dreams, he could still hear the parrots cry, "Pieces of eight, pieces of eight." So the treasure was found and the journey ends.